everybody, to Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate. We're here with another journey segment. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. Today we have Anabel Iakovleva.
That's good.
All right. I was practicing the last name a little bit before we jumped on, but I'm really excited to welcome you today. And Anabel's from Manchester, England, or currently living in Manchester, England. And she's got a really great story and experience of, kind of finding that purpose as you go through life, and especially after university and going through that whole thing and figuring out a career and then realizing maybe that's not where you want to be. And so we've had some conversation. I'm really excited to have her here today to share that experience. So welcome, Anabel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Of course. So, kind of just going into, introducing yourself a little bit. I know you've kind of traveled a little bit in your early years and ending up in Manchester right now, but kind of just going into it, you want to introduce yourself a little bit, where you're from and kind of how you grew up?
Yeah. So my name is Anabel, as you mentioned. I'm originally from Russia, so my whole family is Russian, but I was born in South Korea and I've lived abroad my whole life. So I struggled to pinpoint where my home is exactly, but I came to Manchester in 2018 to what I thought back then to pursue my career and to basically finish university here. And now I'm here. As I say to my family members, I'm stuck here now.
And, kind of as you were traveling and, I thought it was interesting when you said like you struggled to kind of find where, say what your home is, because you have been in some different places at different points in your life. Did you experience any like feelings of mental health challenges when you were younger and just bouncing around a little bit or just trying to figure out, who you are at that time?
Definitely, especially as a young kid, when you were forced to, because I moved, even if I was in the same country, I still moved every 3 years. I didn't live in one country for more than 3 years when I was younger. Going to a new school, meeting new people, being just exposed to everything so new at such a young age. I remember when I was 12 years old, I finally, after like 2-3 years, I finally felt like I was home. I finally felt like I had my group of friends. Finally, I've settled in, and then I have to move again. So I think I didn't necessarily struggle, I guess, with my mental health so much because I think I was too young to actually understand what mental health is. And I feel like kind of going back to like childhood traumas, it was harder. It's quite hard for me to like express my emotions, I guess, because of past issues and whatnot. So it was kind of hard to properly understand what I was feeling. So it took me a while. I think only when I actually started living alone, I started actually understanding what mental health is and seeing what I've struggled with and what I struggle with and how to basically keep going.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty common, especially when we're younger, not to really understand. I know I didn't understand why I felt the way I did when I was younger. I just, I was just trying to figure out who I was, and I felt different. But like you said, I couldn't, being young, I couldn't pinpoint what exactly that was.
Yeah.
And just like I kind of want to ask you. Being in the different cultures that you were in growing up, was there a focus on like mental health in those different cultures, or was it talked about? Because I know when I grew up, it wasn't as big as, it's not as talked about as it is today. So just kind of was that a conversation around you, or did you just, again, something you didn't really see or realize?
It was honestly never talked about. Honestly, never talked about, and especially like with my parents being like growing up in like the Soviet Union and everything, it's not really talked about in Russia, especially with like the older generation, and even in Korea, like it's a fact that like a lot of people struggle, especially young kids struggle with mental health regarding like education. Like it's very extreme there, so it's not really talked about. Yeah, it's not talked about. The only time where I've noticed that mental health is actually important and they consider it in a workspace or in your degree in school, wherever, is literally when I came to the UK. So it
Oh
was,
yeah, that's
yeah.
no, that's just interesting that that was like the, when you really started to see it and the focus on it. And just being in different places, I think that's interesting to see the difference in how we all handle those things. And definitely, older generations, I think it wasn't as talked about. It's kind of that mindset of just pull it together, get through your life, do what you're supposed to do
Exactly,
type of.
exactly. And that's
Yeah.
going back to what I said a little bit about like childhood trauma. Not that I blame my parents for this or anything, but whenever I would speak about me being sad or me being upset for whatever reason, I was always told, like, you're fine, you're still young, like, you'll be okay. I was never allowed to properly actually process and understand what I'm feeling, why I'm feeling like this, and how to get out of that. So it was literally like all by myself. And I remember just looking at quotes, like positive quotes, and putting it on my wallpapers. And those are the little things that like kept me going at such a young age because I didn't really even understand.
Yeah, and when we don't have that time to process it, especially when we're younger, I know for me, my parents put me in anger management because that's kind of how it came out, and how I express myself. But it was definitely way more than just anger inside of me. And when we don't learn how to process it and understand it in a healthy way, that's where some of that, that depression can take over, that anxiety. Or for me, it was a lot of drugs, and that was the way I ended up coping and dealing with my emotions. So I think that's an important point that you just said was, being younger and not having that avenue to process it. Then as we get older, that can become a habit, and it's harder to kind of get past it.
Exactly. Yeah, I really relate to what you said about like I didn't have anger management, but I did have anger issues. I was just always angry for no reason. And because I couldn't really figure out what the exact reason was. I was just angry at the world.
Yeah, and then that plays such a role in how we grow, right? When we're dealing with that when we're younger, then it starts to impact different choices we make or how we handle those things. So, as you settled to Manchester, it was that where you finished university or where you started, or is that where you spent like did all of your university?
Yeah, so I came in 2018. I went to Sheffield. So I did my university. So I finished university there, and then I stayed an extra year, which I think we'll get into it a bit later. But then I stayed a year, and then I came to Manchester in 2022. So summer 2022. So I've been here for a year and a half, and the first time it like really hit me, like the worst times is when I just moved to Manchester. Like mental health wise, that's when it.
Yeah, it started to really kind of become more prevalent in your life.
Yeah, yeah.
What was that process like, going to university and saying like, okay, you're gonna graduate, you're gonna start a career, and this is how you're gonna spend the rest of your life. And I know when we had briefly talked, you had mentioned that was one part of it that like you really struggled with that concept after you graduated. So kind of, going into that a little bit more, what was that like when you were going through that process, and then when you graduated realizing like, oh, now I'm supposed to just start the rest of my life?
Yeah, that's literally how it happened when because throughout uni I was I felt like I had my life together. I finished this degree and then I'm gonna do my master's because that's what everybody tells you to do. Go to school, get good grades, to then go to uni to get good grades, to then work for the rest of your life, and then get a family, etc. And it was so engraved in my head, and I feel like a lot of young people have this engraved in their head. But the older we get, the more we're like, this is not what we want to do. So when I graduated, I didn't have a care in the world. I was like, yeah, I'll be fine. But then after I graduated, I realized like, okay, I don't want to do my like what I did for bachelor's for my master's. So I started thinking, okay, what else do I enjoy? What other things? So I decided to take a gap year and then do my master's after the gap year. And in this year, that's when I realized like I don't I don't want to do any of this. I don't want to do any of this. I don't really want to go to uni, back to uni. The things that I enjoy, I can't see myself working in one doing one thing for the rest of my life. So it started spiraling from there, where I started overthinking and just I just didn't know what to do. It felt like I had no guidance. It felt like I needed to grow up, but I was still in like my 16-year-old mentality. So that's how it like started spiraling downhill.
Excuse me. And I think that's a really relatable thing to go through. I know, um, just going through that process of working towards something and working towards something and working towards something, then you're at that point where now you got to work towards something more, and then then you're gonna work for that rest of that time. And when we're not doing something we're passionate about, or when or something we really want to be involved in, it makes that process harder, right? So
Yeah.
when you got your degree, and going to your master's, was that in something that you were really passionate about, or something that just like made sense that was going to support you for your life?
It just made sense. It was nowhere near to me being passionate about. The thing with me is that I enjoy a lot of subjects. Like I'm interested in a lot of things, but not to the point where I'm gonna work in this field for the rest of my life. So I did biochemistry as a degree, and it was interesting, don't get me wrong, but I just can't see myself working in a lab researching proteins for the rest of my life. I personally could not find a purpose. So after I graduated, after I realized I don't want to do masters, I was looking for jobs and I was applying for jobs. And like, the thing is, I was applying, I was getting these jobs, but then I hated them. I hated every single job. And in the past two years, I've had like 6 different jobs that I couldn't last for more than like a month, just because I genuinely couldn't. I hated it. I hated waking up, and I just dreaded it so much that it made it even worse. And it felt like the jobs, because it felt like I wasn't, like it didn't if it didn't sorry, it felt like I had no purpose doing these jobs. It just felt like a mere collection of tasks, like a little to-do list. That's what it felt like, going into work and doing the things that I don't see a purpose in. Like, and for me, if I don't like something, if I don't see that it's actually doing something good or even just fulfilling for me, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to have any persistence to keep doing it, and especially even do better.
Yeah, and what was that like? Because I know you had said when you were in university, you felt like you kind of had your life together. You felt like you were good. You were doing what you're supposed to do, and then you transition in that moment where society tells us, like, when you transition to that moment, like, that's life, that's awesome. You're gonna start a career. You're gonna start, like you said, a family, or you're gonna start like just the rest of your life. And if you were just explaining how when you started that next step and you hated it and it was just miserable for you, what was that transition like, going from this feeling of graduating and you're on to that next step of your life to then just like, this is the next step of my life, I hate this? What was that transition like mentally, and how did you handle that?
It was very, I would say, sudden, very, very sudden. It felt like I was just like pushed into this world of like adulthood, and I was just so not ready. And it felt, obviously I started comparing myself to people in my course that went on to get masters and then went on to get careers related to their degrees. And I started comparing. I started it literally just went downhill from that. It was like one day I was really happy and I was excited and looking forward to it, and then the next day I actually went into that next step, like work, for example, and I realized, like, this is not the life that everybody tells me about, because when growing up, like, what people and what your family members and what society tells you is the next step, you kind of get excited about it. You realize that this is the normal thing, everybody does this, and look how other people are happy, so you expect yourself to be happy as well. But it was very sudden. It literally felt like somebody pushed me into adulthood.
And I really like how you explain that. And because at that point in my life, I was getting clean off drugs. You know, the point I was supposed to graduate, I think I was 25 when I got clean. And I was comparing myself to other people that I had known in high school or college, and they were graduating and starting life. And when I started to compare myself, I was like, oh, I'm a failure. Like I'm unhappy. I'm this, you know, I'm in my parents' basement again, trying to start over. And just looking at that thinking, oh, their life must be perfect.
Yeah.
You know, oh, they must be so happy because they hit that next step. But I think that's an important thing to realize, that just because we're supposed to be happy or we're supposed to be, you know, excited, it can be a really hard point in somebody's life to take that next transition forward through life. So I really like how you kind of hit on that. What was that? When you said you were comparing, what were you comparing in your moment to people that were in that same place as you?
Well, I was comparing like career wise, what are they doing with their life, work wise? And literally what you said, I felt like a failure because people were doing the things that they at least enjoyed and that they wanted to pursue. And I felt like I didn't have that. Obviously, I started comparing myself to them, to people online, and especially now, like during this hustle culture, everybody is like, you know, trying to make money, trying to have a business, all of this. It felt like everybody else was here and I was down here. You know, it comparison is evil, basically. It's horrible. Like it felt like now looking back, obviously I realized that I was comparing my chapter 1 to like somebody else's chapter 15. You know, we're not the same people. We don't have the same interests. We don't have the same life goals and ambitions. Like it's, you can't possibly compare yourself to someone who's not even in your own like race. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good philosophy to look at that when you're comparing, because you don't know where somebody else is in that step. You don't, you know, we're different people, and that's what I had to realize. And I had to realize it quick, or it was gonna, you know, it was taking me over. Because, like you said, comparison can be evil, and it can be so detrimental to what you're going through. But I had to realize, like, okay, somebody else's, you know, these people around me, their step was to go and, you know, go to college and graduate and everything, and mine was different. Mine was to go through these really hard challenges and struggles, and you know, luckily come out on the other side and kind of start my life then and do something then. So I love that analogy of how to look at each other, and you know, we're in different chapters of life,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
okay to be at those
And also,
points.
also about like comparing yourself to others, you don't actually realize what goes on just because they show that, or like you see something really amazing on social media, someone being, you know, having a lot of money, or, you know, pursuing whatever they want to do. You don't actually realize what happens behind closed doors. Like, for example, my dad, he's a marine engineer, hence we were traveling a lot. So growing up, like I don't know how to say this without, basically I am quite fortunate. Like my family is fortunate, and if it wasn't for my dad, I actually I don't know where I would be right now. But he has such a good job. You know, he makes X amount of money. He's, you know, from the outside it looks like, you know, all is good. But I know my dad, and he wakes up and he hates his job. He hates going in, and he cannot wait to like retire. And it's like little things like this. You don't actually know what people think when they're alone, without trying to influence someone on social media or without trying to boast about themselves. Like you actually don't know what goes on in their head.
Yeah, and that's such an important thing to realize. And I'm so with you on that, in the aspect of, you know, I believe everybody's got, you know, their struggle, and everybody has their story. And, you know, it doesn't really matter what that story is or what we go through. It's, we all handle those and process those in our own perspective. So,
Yeah.
you know, it doesn't make one less than or more than the other. It's just our own personal struggle. And that's such an important thing to realize, because you know, people might look at you and see what you're doing and be like, oh, their life must be so great and so perfect. And, you know, they don't know the struggle that you've gone through or currently going through to create what you want out of life and
Yeah,
create what you're doing today.
exactly. Yeah, definitely.
So as it started getting worse for you and you started hitting that wall and started spiraling a little bit, um, what did that do to you mentally, and how did that affect just your life and your relationships in general?
So it started off by, when we moved to Manchester, it felt like a new fresh start. I was, I had so many plans that I was gonna, do this and do that and make friends and blah blah blah. But then as soon as I came here, I realized, okay, I need to look for a job. And then when I started looking and started realizing, actually thinking like, oh, this is gonna be my day-to-day like life. I don't want this. So that's like how it basically occurred. And then the first like signs that I've noticed is I because like in university, even when I was younger, I was very outgoing person. I was very, happy. I was always like the annoying loud girl. And I was always super happy. And the very first thing I've noticed is when I stopped being myself. I stopped wanting to go out, like, and I don't mean out like clubbing or anything. I mean outside, like even just outside, like for some dinner, for lunch with my partner, even to see my friend. I stopped being social. That's when I realized, okay, something is actually wrong. And then from that, it developed into just completely like waking up with anger, just feeling anger and not wanting to get out of bed, to the point where I would literally like lay in bed all day and I wouldn't even get up to the go to the toilet just because I couldn't. Not physically I couldn't. I mentally I didn't want to. I didn't want to get out of bed. I just wanted to be in the dark, just asleep all the time. And it got to the point where like I didn't know how to get out of this. I felt like such a failure. I felt like I had no purpose. I genuinely felt like I was just better off if I didn't exist. So it like, yeah, it basically happened. Mentally, I wasn't here. It felt like I wasn't here. It felt like I was alive but not living.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I can relate a lot to just that feeling of not being able to do something. Like you said, like physically I could get up and I could go brush my teeth or I could go shower at those hard points of my life. But mentally, I mean, I would literally, there was probably weeks I would go without like taking care of myself, brushing my teeth and showering and just doing those things because I couldn't convince myself to do it. It was just like, well, you're worthless, so you shouldn't even do these little things as you're going through life. And um when you're when you're in that period, it's such a hard thing for people, I think, to understand at times. Like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you getting up? Like, why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you going throughout your day normally? And it's a hard thing to explain. So did you have anybody like kind of pointing that out to you and saying like, hey, why are you just laying here all day?
My partner, no, like bless him, he was there for me from like day one. But when it just started happening, because he did computer science, and now after graduating he got a job, amazing job in that field, and he's still working in this job like at that specific company. So he didn't understand what it meant to do something that you enjoy. Like he couldn't properly fully understand the fact that if I don't like it, I'm not going to do it. To him, he was like, how? Just do something that you like. But I couldn't find what exactly I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And that's where I struggled. That's where I felt like a failure, just because I didn't even know what. So when it first started happening, like I remember like trying to speak to him a little bit, and he wouldn't really understand, and he would kind of say things like, Annabelle, like, you can go get a job even part-time, like you can do these things. And trying to explain to him that I mentally can't do them. I mentally cannot get myself out, because I know for a fact if I were to go out in that state, I would probably end up in jail. I'd probably like end up hitting or slapping someone just because of like all the anger and just like yeah. So it was harder to explain for him. But then once I got into like I think the biggest hole, like of mental state wise, the biggest hole that I was in, I started thinking, when I was trying to get out of it, I started thinking like, Annabelle, stop being I felt like selfish. I felt like I couldn't feel like that. Even I even felt that about myself. Where, Annabelle, you have a house. You have roof under your head, over above your head. You have food on your table. You have a dog that you love. Like, you have a partner that you love. You have family. You have friends. Why do you? There's people that don't even have a quarter of the things that I have, and are and why am I struggling? Why am I struggling like this? I should be happy with all the things, which is also something that we'll get into, but something that helped me to get out of that as well.
Yeah, and so kind of go into that a little bit, that what was that like darkest moment for you, or that, that point where you realized this was a huge problem and that you had to start to do something about it? What was that kind of like rock bottom moment where it just kind of slapped you in the face?
I think when I got to the point, like I said earlier, where I physically couldn't, mentally I couldn't do something, and it came to the point where for like 3 weeks straight, I wouldn't do anything other than just scroll aimlessly on TikTok or Instagram in my dark bedroom for the whole day while my partner was working, going to the gym, doing everything, and that was the hardest bit. Is also mentally, I just kept thinking I'm a failure. It got to the point where I genuinely didn't want to be in this world anymore. I thought, like, I did have like suicidal thoughts, and actually, like, yeah, basically I did have a little bit of like suicidal thoughts, and that's when I realized, like, and then I remember telling this to my partner, that I, have these thoughts. That's when he was like, okay, like, I think you need to get like external help. And that's when I was like, okay, yeah, I think it's time. I think it got to the point where I was so sad, and then that sadness turned into anger, and that anger turned into like just humor. You know what I mean? Like, where I was like, okay, Annabelle, get out of this. Like, stop it. So I like talking to my partner, I realized, okay, I need to, probably look into therapy or something. So that was like the beginning of
Yeah,
getting.
and that's such a, when you're supposed, and you kind of explained this a minute ago, but you're supposed to be happy. You
Mm.
have these things that you listed off, and people look at that and say you're supposed to be happy because you're in their eyes successful. You have that house, a relationship, a degree to start a career. You have all this stuff, and it almost makes those feelings harder, like, to deal with, because you're like, like you said, why am I feeling this way when I have this stuff I should be happy about? But I think that kind of just goes to that point of, if we're not doing something that makes us feel good and feel alive, and something that we're really passionate about or care about, doesn't matter what we have around us, it can eat at us inside, to the point where we are angry, or we are depressed, or we have those thoughts that, like, life is pointless.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah, I felt exactly like that, and it just, I felt selfish for feeling like this, because there's people that live on the streets, that don't get any food, that don't even have clothes to wear, and I'm here sitting in my 2-bedroom apartment, like in the city center, and I'm complaining. It just yeah.
And that's, and again, that's just one of those little elements that add up to make those thoughts and feelings harder, because not only are you convincing yourself that you shouldn't be angry because you have this stuff, but then you add the element of, well, and other people don't have it, so now I'm even a worse person because I'm not happy with my life, and
Exactly.
other people are in worse situations.
Exactly. It just felt like I was overthinking it. Well, now looking back, I was definitely overthinking it and just overcomplicating it, instead of just taking a step back, breathing in, breathing out, and then doing what was necessary for me to get out of it.
So when you had that conversation and you started looking at, like, okay, you need some help. I can't do this alone. I need some help. Was that an easy thing for you to accept? Like, I can't do this by myself right now. So somebody else has to help me.
I
Was
think,
that, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, sorry. I think it was harder before I realized it, because before I had this conversation with my partner, I did have thoughts like, okay, like I think I need therapy. I think I need therapy, but I kept convincing myself because of like, oh, I shouldn't feel like this because of that. I kept convincing myself that, oh, I'll be fine. I'll get out of it myself. It's fine. Until I had this conversation, until I realized that like, okay, it's gotten to the point where I'm actually having like suicidal thoughts. I need external help. And then when I spoke about it with my partner and just seeing his reaction, because to me that was normal, you know, in my head I was like, oh, it's fine. Like I have these feelings every day. It's fine. But then when I told it to my partner, I remember he was like, he didn't really know. I could see basically like the shock and the concern in his face where he didn't really know how to help. And that's when I realized like, oh, I think I need like actually help. And it was easier to accept it that I need help then, like after talking to him, after seeing his reaction.
Because it's not an easy thing, I think, to accept. I mean, no matter how bad our life can get, we don't want to always accept like, oh, I can't do this. And I went through that so long with with drugs, and that I was like, oh yeah, my life has fallen apart. I've dropped out of college 4 times. I've lost all my relationships. I've ended up homeless. I don't have anything to eat, but I think I can do it this time. I think I can figure it out by myself this time. And it wasn't until like I finally just hit that point where I was tired of trying. Nothing was working. And I spent years and years and years like this. And I was just so tired that it was like, I have to give up and let somebody else try to help me, because that's the only way I'm going to stop feeling like I do. And that was such a huge moment. It was very tough, and it definitely took a little bit of time, even as I started to let go of some of that control. Um, but obviously it did wonders. It really helped me process a lot of different things I couldn't process on my own. So what was that initial like entry into that like for you? Were you able to just jump into it and put all that effort forward and feel really good about it, or was it like that slow kind of process of letting go a little bit at a time?
I think it was a process of like letting go, because still to this day, like there's days where I wake up and I still feel a little bit like a failure, but I'm able to look at the situation way better and actually acknowledge that, I'm on the right path. Wherever this path is, however long this path will take, I'm on the right path. So I think it was harder to accept in the beginning, like I said before, like that conversation with my partner. But then afterwards, I think what really like shook me is like his reaction, and just kind of talking to my friends, and them telling me and advising that, okay, I think you need like therapy or something, like external help. So the whole process of actually getting into therapy was actually quite like easy for me, because I one of like my friends had therapy through this specific like website. And so it was quite easy because I had the website already saved from like years ago, just in case. But it was quite easy because I think I don't know how to properly explain this, but at that point, I think I was looking for help. I think I wanted help because I felt like I was so lost. I didn't know what to do. It genuinely felt like I didn't know how to get wherever I wanted to get. And I was reaching out for help, but I just didn't know how to ask or who to ask. And then obviously the conversation therapy, that's where I was like, okay, I have this saved. I literally have it all saved. I need to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's such a empowering thing that you just shared of, maybe not knowing exactly how to say it or what to do, but you knew you needed that help. If you wanted something different, and if you wanted to start working towards what you were working towards or what you wanted to work towards, you needed some guidance in that. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's so much power in letting somebody help you, letting somebody in enough to help you kind of do that. It sounded like you were able to do that. It sounded like you had a pretty good support system around you to say like, hey, I'm struggling. And then people being like, hey, yeah, let's find you what you need
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
to keep moving forward.
yeah. And like the whole like start of the therapy. So I didn't do like talking therapy sessions. We did like a little cognitive behavioral course, I think. So it was she would give me like tasks. I would like the initial, I would talk to her, I would tell her about my problems, and then she would give me tasks. And that's why it was better for me, because I said earlier, like it's kind of hard for me to like talk about my emotions and feelings. So it was a lot easier to like speak to a stranger about these things than it was with my partner. Even though he was like supporting me throughout the whole thing, it just sometimes it felt like he didn't understand what I was going through. And some of my other friends couldn't really understand as well, to the extreme point that I was feeling it.
Yeah, and that's I would agree with that. Like it's hard to, put into words, especially when you don't know always the best words to use anyway. Like it's a hard thing to describe depression. It's a hard thing to describe anger. It's a hard thing. It was a hard thing for me to describe, like, yeah, like I have to get high. There's no other choice. I don't have a choice in the matter. It's just like I have to get high before I do anything else. And you tell that to somebody who doesn't get high or barely drinks, and they're like, what
Why?
are you
Yeah.
talking about? Just don't do
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
um,
And what I said earlier about how it was sadness and then anger and then like just jokes. So that's also part of the reason why like people didn't really take me seriously, is because I've quite a dark humor. So I was like joking about these things. I was like, "Oh, I might unalive myself tomorrow." Haha, it was like these kind of jokes that, because I was saying it in such a manner, obviously it didn't feel like I was serious. So it was even harder to properly be like, no, I'm serious, while still laughing about it.
yeah. Do you think that humor coming out was a way for you to ask for help without like necessarily saying it, like a way for you to express those feelings without having to like acknowledge the power and control there or how big they're actually affecting you?
Definitely, definitely. I think, yeah, I think it's like the humor was like a little cry for help, kind of, but not like, but in a way that, oh, but don't take me that seriously. I want help, but don't take me that seriously. Like I'm not. It's okay. But yeah.
And yeah, that's the thing with it is we're trying to figure that out and navigate that and of how to express ourselves, how to ask for help, and it's tough when we're in those dark places trying to do that.
Yeah.
So as you started that therapy and that process of which you were doing it, um, was it like did things immediately start getting better? Did you see the differences and the changes, or was it still kind of a dark period and it took a little bit of time before you started being like, oh, this is actually working?
I think it took a little bit of time. It took less time than I thought it would. Like honestly, I won't lie. It took less time than I thought it would. But I remember like the first couple of sessions that I've had with the therapist, I was a bit like kind of, I didn't really understand. I didn't, because it was my first therapy sessions ever. So I was like, oh, I don't know how this works. I don't know what's gonna do. And it felt like the first like 2 3 sessions it didn't really change much, and especially like the tasks that she was giving me, it felt like, I don't know, it just felt like I was like, oh, what is the point of doing this? But then once I actually started, because she would send me a bunch of like external links of little guidelines and little things to look out for, all of these like things that you can see on the NHS, like the healthcare basically system here in the UK. I remember just doing even more research, and I got into some self-help books and just kind of, and that's how I started properly like thinking about myself, my feelings, and I started journaling. I remember one of the biggest things that helped me was writing gratitude lists. So just even speaking about these things after those couple of sessions, once I started realizing the things that actually helped me, started like, you know, trying new things basically, and then telling her about it, that's when I noticed the actual change, where not only that I these things that I've like found myself that are helping me, but also a professional is telling me that these will help. So it was kind of like a combination of those two things.
Yeah, and those things really can be or seem so simple.
Yeah.
Like I'm a huge I'm a huge gratitude person because it's done a lot for my life, and it's it's kept me in a positive mood. Doesn't always work, but when I can look at things and compare, my life today to what it looked like 10 years ago, and be like, okay, yeah, this kind of sucks today, but I'm not chasing a bag,
Yeah.
living on the street right now. And so I think those are really powerful tools that you just mentioned. And I want to go back to something you said earlier, that you still might have a thought of being a failure today, but you handle it differently. You approach that thought differently than maybe you did before. So, how important has those new tools, journaling, a gratitude list, a therapist, and all these different things, how important has that been to progressing you not only in life, but just your overall feelings of well-being and happiness?
I think the biggest thing for me was definitely just accepting whatever it is for it, whatever it is, kind of thing. Like the biggest thing also with like therapy, it wasn't the actual, so like I mentioned earlier, it wasn't the actual like sessions that helped me, but it was the work that I was doing by myself in between those sessions. Like even those gratitude lists, I remember just because I used to take like I didn't take journaling seriously. I used to think they're like cringy. And then I started doing it myself, and then I transitioned into writing the gratitude lists. And I just remember writing my very first like gratitude list. And I was writing things like, I'm grateful for music, like plants, the sunshine, like the most basic things that we as people just kind of tend to overlook because it's always there. And I remember just crying like happiness, like happy tears that are like, how can I be so sad when there's so many like beautiful things that I have and that I'm grateful for? So even though now, like, I don't write those gratitude lists, not always, but I always, whenever I'm in that state where I'm like feeling angry or I feel like, I'm not there where I'm not where I want to be yet, I always like think like, okay, Annabelle, you have so many things to be grateful for. And I just look back on all of those. Like I remember it's always in the back of my head. I always like have it in the back of my head thinking about, okay, these are the things that help you. Just think of all the things that you're grateful for. And it really does like help. It's kind of crazy because I didn't think that a piece of paper and a pen would do much for you, but it truly did.
Yeah, I think it's really important what you said, that it wasn't just the therapy sessions. It was more so the work you were putting in between. It was following that up and applying it to your actual day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's the important part of it, because like it was really easy to work on myself in rehab. I was away. I was for 2 weeks. I was away, and I had a schedule set. Like, you're going to go to this therapist, then you're going to do a group session, then you're going to have a meeting here.
Mhm.
And it's really easy when you're in those protected settings of a therapy session or a rehab, or in the hospital, whatever it may be. And the
Mhm.
real important aspect of that comes when you go back into your life. Whether it's when you walk out of that session, or when you leave the hospital, or when I got out of rehab. It's so important to find ways to do that. And I think that's, again, I'm going back to, I'm really big into gratitude. So I love hearing that you've been able to like apply that and help with your, your feelings on a day, or your attitude about life, and be able to just kind of go back to that when you need it. Those tools are so important, and that's what kind of keeps us going. So I think those are great examples of positive tools. I'm sure journaling or thinking about that gratitude list has done more than, scrolling aimlessly through
Def-
TikTok and
Definitely,
those type of things that we go into when we're feeling that way.
definitely, yeah, definitely. But
So yeah, go ahead.
no, no, sorry, you were gonna say.
Yep. No, I was just gonna say, like, as you started to see, your life get better, and you're starting to see some of those positive things. I know, you know, kind of what you do on Instagram, and, showing a better lifestyle, or different things people can do to better themselves. When did that come into play? And what has that been a tool for you in your recovery to feel good?
So because my biggest issue was like career wise, I felt like a failure. I didn't know how to move forward. And I started thinking of like, what do I like? And like I said earlier, I'm interested in a lot of things. Like I hate math, but I would love to, study mathematics and like philosophy, mathematics, whatnot. But I can't imagine myself actually doing this for the rest of my life. So it was a struggle to figure out what exactly I can do. So instead of looking at what I like, I started looking at what am I good at. And growing up, I was very like athletic. I did sports literally my whole life, and I still enjoy sports, obviously, and like fitness and moving my body. It always made me feel very good, like just instantly like lifted my mood, and I always felt like very confident when I was like into sports back then. So I was like, okay, actually, I might be able to make a career out of it. And then when I realized that the biggest issue for me as well, like regarding career, is that I didn't really want to be someone's slave, if you know what I mean. Like I didn't want to be some multi-billionaire's like robot sitting there when they don't even care about me. My salary is capped. I'm stuck in a location in a specific company. I can't. There's no like prospect. Well, there is prospects, but I couldn't see prospects for myself personally for my fulfillment. So, and then I realized like I can be a personal trainer and I can have my own business. I can work online. I don't, I can be anywhere in this world. And I can still make money. And the whole social media thing came up with the fact that I wanted to make a social media account. So when I do finish my qualification, I have clients already ready. But then that like transitioned after like speaking out about like my mental health and just career wise and stuff. Even back then when I had way less followers, I remember the feedback that I got was so many people related to this. There was like over 20 people that messaged me, and I had like 1,000 followers back then, so it was like nothing. I remember like 20 plus people messaged me saying like, oh my goodness, I relate to this. Like, what are you doing? This is what I'm doing. And it is just that's when it transitioned to actually the fact that I can not only make a business, but also have some kind of a positive impact on social media. And I remember I posted like a reel recently, well, a couple months ago, and the feedback like that I got from that, people like relating to it and then sending me DMs, like strangers, people that I've never met in my life that don't know me, I don't know them, and just feeling that they relate to me and that I'm not alone, that they're not alone. It just, we kind of bring ourselves up, and it's nice to know that, it's very fulfilling to me. So that's how that whole idea basically was born and why I'm pursuing it still.
Yeah, and I really think that, your story of going through that is so important to share, because I think a lot of people would look at that and say, okay, you went to university, your life seemed pretty good, you can start your career, you got all these good things for it going for you. Oh, you're good. You're happy. That's what I want, without really realizing that internal struggle that you're going through, which again, I feel like a lot of people can relate to, of like you're taking those steps that society tells you you're supposed to take in life, and yet you don't feel good about life. And so it doesn't make sense, right? It's a hard thing to like make it make sense
Yeah,
as you're doing it.
yeah, yeah, definitely. It was really hard to just accept. I think also the biggest thing that helped me is actually just like taking a step back from myself, from my life, from my situation, from my mental state. Just take a step back and actually realize like, okay, Anabel, you can do so many things. You're like your options are endless. You can do so many things. You can it's the actually overthinking part that really just makes it so much worse. You need to be able to take a step back and kind of see what you're going through from like a different perspective, from a different point of view, and actually be able to understand what is happening and how to move from that.
And that's where I think like, the therapy can be really helpful,
Oh,
or the
yeah.
different tools that we go through life can be really helpful. And like you just said, you're not alone in going through this. There are so many people, and so it's okay when you're going through this, right? It's you're not a terrible person. You're not selfish. You're not all these things that we convince ourselves that we are when you're going through it. It's something that people can relate to, and you're not alone
Yeah.
when
I
that's
just,
happening.
yeah, I also remember I felt like embarrassed, not that only that I was a failure, but I genuinely felt embarrassed. Like, I have a good degree from a good university. Everybody else is doing, whatever they want to do. And I'm over here complaining that, oh, I don't want to get a job. I don't want to do this. It felt like somebody might look at me and be like, go get a job. Like, go get off your ass. Like, stop. Sorry. Can I swear? Is
Oh
that
yeah, you're good.
okay?
You're
Okay.
good.
But yeah, it felt like people would look at me and I would be embarrassed. So that was also like quite a hard thing to, I think, accept and be like, so what? So what? Who are they to tell you anything? Like, if they don't support you, then it's not your friends and it's not your family members. Those are the type of people that you do not need in your life.
And that's so important, and it's again, what I've found really interesting about having different conversations with people like this is, you know I'm I've been through a whole different thing than you have in life, and yeah, I can relate to some of those exact things that you're saying, and feeling alone or feeling embarrassed or angry, and going through all those emotions. And I think that's such an important thing to remember, that like those feelings are normal. And if people aren't going to support you, or they are gonna make you feel embarrassed, or they are gonna make you feel a certain type of way about the situation you're in, like you just said, those probably aren't the people that you need around you, and are the people that are looking out and trying to get the best for you as you go through
Yeah,
life.
definitely, definitely, yeah. And I think it was also quite hard to accept that just because of like society and everything. It felt like I had so much pressure on me to do, to just be,
And that pressure, I think, leads a lot of people to unhappiness.
Yeah,
I think it really can. And so, I think that's a really good thing to show people in your story, is that you did it all that way, and the way society tells us, and it was still not fulfilling you.
yeah,
And that's what we need to find in life. We need to find what is going to fulfill us, and help us enjoy, the time that we have while we're here.
yeah. I hate one thing, like I really wanted to say, is that I really hate how at such a young age, when you finish high school at the age of 18, they tell you, go to uni. So whatever you pick basically at the age of 18, that's what you're going to do for the rest of your life. But I'm sorry, but when I'm 18, my priorities were completely different. Like, you can't. And it's also, I hate the fact how adults and like teachers, they say, oh yeah, as for example, as a doctor, right? They tell you, oh, you're going to save lives. But they don't tell you the fact that you need to be working for 50 hours plus a week, that you're not going to have any life. You're going to be working, you're going to be studying for at least 10 years of your life, etc., etc. They don't tell you all of this. They just tell you, oh, you're going to save lives. And that's like one of the things that was so hard to accept, that I was lied to. Like, it felt like I was lied to at a young age. And it's instead of telling kids like, this is what you need to do, I feel like they should just ask, like, what do you see yourself doing? What do you enjoy? What are you good at? Specifically, what are you good at? And actually working with like people, with young adults, older teenagers, through with that. So
Because it's a process. Like, you don't know. Even with, like I said, I dropped out of college 4 times. And each time I went, I was just going for something different than the last time.
yeah,
And it's because I had no idea. Yeah, I was I was dealing with the drug problem and the mental health stuff on top of trying to force myself. But I kept forcing myself back into that because I felt like I had to do that in order for people around me to think I'm doing okay. Like, oh, I'm in my early 20s. I If I'm not in college right now, if I'm not trying to force myself back into this position, then I'm not successful. And so each time I'd go back, I'd have my life together for like 2 or 3 months, and then I'd go hard again and have to leave and have to drop out. And instead of just like you said, focusing on myself and saying, okay, what work do I need to put in? What am I good at? What do I really want to do with my life? And it kept me in this like just terrible cycle for years and years and years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can relate to that a little bit. Yeah.
So, as we get close to wrapping up here, I just wanted you, I know you kind of introed into, what you're doing right now, but just a little bit more, what is your Instagram page all about, or your perspective on fitness and mental health all about? The description for your page will be in the or the link for your page will be in the description. So definitely people go check Anabel out.
Thank you.
But just give us your perspective on that just a little bit more.
So I didn't really mention much about this, but because I was like very athletic when I was younger, but obviously as a woman in the current society, I did struggle with like body image. So once I started weightlifting, that's when my perspective completely changed. Completely, like I started loving myself. I started, feeling confident in my own skin. Like I will literally support advise bodybuilding for anybody, anybody who's struggling with any mental health or any issues. It's such a fulfilling like activity. I don't know how to explain it, and I won't be able to explain it properly until you actually like get into it and try it. So that's what I want to do with my social media, is just, you know, teach people not only that you have to move your body because you have to, but because you get to. And those are the things that actually helped me, is moving my body is also helped me to get out of that state, is just actually being grateful for the fact that I can move my body, that not because I have to, but because I get to, because I can, because I have four limbs, perfectly working four limbs, it's those little things like that's also when I started training like my physical self, my mental state was also training. Like the resilience that you get, the discipline that you learn, your perspectives and your priorities completely change. It's but to the better, not to the worse, to the better. So that's what I want to show people with my Instagram, and just yeah, basically.
No, I think that's amazing. I think you explained just some of those benefits really well with, the body image and how it can help with that, or the retraining your brain like you're doing your muscles, and that's I think an important aspect of it. And I know, like, just whenever I am in a good routine or doing something active, I feel so much better, and that's really the importance for me in it. Is like, I know if I'm active, I will overall feel better about my life, my day, myself. And so I think that's a really important aspect to mental health, is also to keep yourself moving, and doing something like that.
And it doesn't
Um,
have to be just like weightlifting, by the way, just to clarify. It can literally just be a 20-minute walk. A walk with your, oh, by the way, also one thing that really helped me is getting a dog. Because it felt like I had the purpose. I had to get up, I had to get out of bed and feed him and walk him. That really helped. And like just being outside, moving my body, well, being dragged by him, but moving my body, it really did wonders. Like after, in the long run, it really does a lot for you. So yeah,
yeah,
that,
and that's another great too. I'm a big dog person, so I firmly believe a pet can do a lot for your mental health as well.
definitely.
Um, so just as we kind of get close to wrapping up, here, I just want to again thank you for your time, and thank you for coming on and sharing, your story and your experience with us. I think it's a really relatable experience that can show people that finding fulfillment for yourself in life can be way more important than just going through the motions of what you think you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So is there any last things you want to throw out there before we wrap up? Thoughts, advice, perspective on anything?
Trying to think.
Put
I
you,
think,
put you on the spot there, my bad.
I think, yeah, I think the biggest thing, my advice is, maybe this might sound selfish, but think of yourself. Like, you live in your own body, you live in your own head. You are stuck with yourself for the rest of your life. If you're not putting yourself first, and if you don't love yourself, like, you're not gonna love living. You're not gonna love doing anything. You're not gonna enjoy doing anything if you don't put yourself first. So that's, I think, my biggest piece of advice is, yeah, just listen to your like inner voice, and if you ever need help, don't be like ashamed to reach out, because we all like struggle with it, and it's a never ending journey for the rest of your life. It's never going to end. It's always going to be up and down. So never be ashamed to like reach out to people or reach out for help.
That's a great message to end with right there. Thank you, Anabel. And
Thank you.
thank you again so much. Everybody go check Anabel out. Like I said, the link to her stuff will be in the description. So go check her out, support her. Obviously a great message today. So thank you again so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us and taking the time to do this. I appreciate it.
Thank you for
And
me.
yeah, of course. And this has been another episode of Illuminate Navigate Radio. Everybody have a great rest of your day.
Bye.